Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Premier League Show, brought to you here by American Scouser TV. I am joined with my friend Matush out in Chicago. How are you, my friend?
Doing well. Another week. Just good old fun. How are you?
I'm doing all right. You should be doing better than that. You have a green arrow. You had a green arrow that jumped over me. I mean, these are all things that are usually supposed to be
I
things
didn't
that should bring positives. Don't
didn't
come into
want
this
to bring
like
it
we
up.
went to a morgue.
Didn't want to bring it up. I didn't want to gloat in your face too much because I know if I do, then this week you're gonna outscore me by 40. So I'm gonna just kind of
Well,
just play
I was
cool.
going to say I'd start early because I've outscored you basically over the last decade every year we play the game, and I'll probably do it again this year. That's the plan. But we will see. But we will get right into it. But before we do, we will do what we always do, which is invite everyone to join our American Scouser Cup, which is ongoing and still accepting new entrants. So the code's on the screen, 2EXGOB. Jump in, see how you match up, see how you do this week, see how you do next week, next month, 2 months from now, etc. as we run out through the rest of the season. A lot of stuff happening in the fantasy league, right? A lot of stuff happening in the fantasy world. We always start every single week with a look at our American Scouser Cup standings, which shows that unused substitute has moved themselves to the top. 206 points, nothing to scoff at. Really nice place overall. I did not take a look before we started at exactly where that is in the overall standings, but top of our table, unfortunately for Trevor, our friend, fell out of the top 10. So therefore, no longer on our leaderboard. We'll see if that changes in weeks to come, but we'll continue to have our eyes set on all of the changes in our top 10 each week as we report and start out the podcast. So when I look here at the team of the week, what jumps out at you? Any surprises, players you had in your team, maybe guys you thought about bringing into your team? Oh, I think that's the wrong week. Sorry. It's clearly a mistake there in our scores of the week because that was not what happened. How do I know that? I know that because Embuemo didn't score 16 points this week
Yeah.
because he was in my side and he scored 2. So I don't have the highlights of the team of the week. I know you have it on your other screen. Why don't you just talk to any of the surprises you had from this week's team of the week?
Yeah, let me just throw this up for you guys.
Thank you.
There it is. Was that good? I'm trying to see both screens here, so
Still good.
Get in. Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, a little interesting. Matty Cash, the Polish hero that we all asked for, is there leading the back line along with Gusto, Udogi, and Anderson. Udogi is someone that I've been pretty high on since the beginning of the year, so I'm pretty excited to see him there. I think Gusto, we mentioned his name a couple weeks ago as a decent Reece James substitute if you want to only spend $4 million on a defender, and if you did, that was a great choice. I think Pochettino might be getting the best out of Sterling, and this might be a year where you look into having Raheem Sterling again. And last year was an entire year of let's not even touch this guy. But this year he looks like a whole new player. So definitely it's been fun to see that. Outside of that, I mean, not necessarily the Paulinho is a little surprising just because he's a defensive mid, right? He's not really a guy that's going to produce so many returns going forward. And then Darwin, in our case, just because he didn't start, he had all of 15 minutes, but he made him the best 15 minutes you could ever ask for. So yeah, and I think overall, there's not too many surprises outside of the select few, but it'll be interesting to see. I think there's a slide that talks about the team of the week from before and how they perform the next week. It'll be interesting to see which one of these guys performs well next week, because there seems to be a trend that the team of the week here, by next week time, they are nowhere near the team of the week.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When I really look at this, it's like, how crazy is it? You must really have to be irritated if you're Matty Cash. You're like, I got 17 points as a fantasy league defender, and I wasn't the top scorer of the week. Like that's a tough spot. I think it's a good shout on Sterling. I've thought about bringing him into my team multiple times because at such a low price, he offers a really good route into offensive firepower, but I've struggled with Chelsea as a whole. Like the squad as a whole, the team as a whole, just supporting them and backing them. I think a lot of this between Diaby and Bowen, they were just really great matchups, really good performances. Same with Darwin. Um, Paulinho was a little bit crazy just because he scores the late goal and then he gets the 3 bonus points. So when you add all that in, I just think that there's a lot here that moves. I think Gusto and Udogie are really great shouts. You're welcome, by the way, because I told you not to make transfers and just start that player, and you could do everything you needed to do. And then you started that player, and
I was going to. I was going to.
Oh, I'm sure you were, but it's still the reason you beat me. It was a smart move on your part. I will say when we start to look at the transfers in from this week, if you want to stop sharing your screen.
Yes, I do.
We look at the transfers coming in this week. It's big surprise. Almost 1 million people bringing in a $7 million midfielder who's, I think, now the top scorer overall in the whole game. I think, if I'm not mistaken. If he isn't, he's right there at the top. So you have Sterling, Madison, Gusto, Udogie, and Cash. Other than the fact that you want to be as Polish as can be, so you have to have some Matty Cash at some point this season in your team. What on this buying, spree have we seen that you agree with?
Weirdly enough, I don't dislike any of the 5. I feel like some weeks there's just one or two that doesn't make sense, or it might be just to beat some trends. To hop on a trend, to hop on the end of a train, so to speak. But I feel like all of those choices are ones that I've considered myself if I don't have them in my team. Madison, I've had a love-hate relationship with him since right before the season started. And so it's nice to see his name up there because I think he really is playing well at Tottenham. It feels like he's been there for a couple of years. He just fits in seamlessly. And so I think overall it looks good. Fun little trivia. The highest scoring player in fantasy right now is Sully March. So there's that. Tied with Rodri. So actually both of them have 26. But Sterling is right there with 23. So I think overall, especially with Sterling being at 7.2 and being in that interesting 6.5 to 7.5 window that makes him really affordable, it makes it really interesting. And I think this is going to be the beginning where people start to really branch off the template. If there really was one to begin with, there was a little bit of one, but people will start to really move around now and kind of play around with a lot more pieces than there were before just because of the price factor.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's crazy with Sully March. Doesn't really surprise me because he's had a couple great match weeks there. I mean, when the news that Ansu Fati is joining Brighton on loan, which is just insane in itself.
Bizarre. So bizarre.
It probably does actually cut into a little bit of Sully March's minutes because I think Fati is going to play on the right when he plays. I think he's going to play more in Europe and cup matches. I think the Premier League is just too tough for him, but we'll figure that out when we get a price on him and we can figure out how to talk about it as a fantasy asset. But as far as Sterling goes, I get it. He's scoring goals. He's making things happen. I still don't have faith in Chelsea going forward. I have more faith in Chelsea defending, which is why I love the 3rd pick. We'll look at my team later. We'll talk about what I'm doing this week. Madison has been a revelation. And if you listen to the new manager of Spurs talk about Madison, you understand that, this guy went to Tottenham and basically said, you have to sign James Madison. I want James Madison. he's basically told everyone he's building the entire Tottenham club around James Madison's skill sets. And it was almost like he said, like, we let Harry Kane go and I handed the number 10 jersey to James Madison to continue building around number 10. And I don't know if it'll work or not, but it's looked really good through 3 matches. I'll give him a lot of credit. And I think part of that is the defender that you talked about earlier. Great signing. Maybe so far this season might be the signing of the year as far as a player to come into the Premier League and actually stake their claim as really showing that they belong. So lots of great ins. Let's take a look at some of the outs. Oh, sorry about that. Sometimes the outs give us an actual look at the injured. And in this case, I think it's more about the concern. Luke Shaw, we all know why he's out. He's hurt. He's going to be out for a while. We can expect a lot of exodus. Gabriel, Rashford, João Pedro, Matoma. Which of those 4 surprises you the most?
Probably Matoma, given his price. I don't know if it's because people are worried that Ansu Fati is going to come in and play on the left side. Because I know Fati, he can play on the left, but when you have Matoma there already, I don't picture that happening at all. And for the price that he's at, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. I understand that, they didn't have the best of weeks, and it might be more reactionary than anything, but that one's pretty surprising. And then I guess Rashford to an extent is a little surprising too. He's more expensive though. So if we see a lot of people going on Madison, I understand people going off Rashford to one of those. I don't understand people going off of Matoma to go up to Sterling or Madison, because then they probably have to take a hit unless they had an extra free transfer. So that's why that one doesn't make as much sense.
Yeah, I'd actually agree a lot there. I think João Pedro is a weird one. Like, he's a player who went up in price even after a week where he was sold more than he was purchased, which was kind of odd, except for the fact that I think there's a lot of upside in his potential. So I think a lot of players are thinking to themselves, it went a couple weeks and now they've bought another attacker. Maybe it doesn't make sense. I'll make the move now. As far as Rashford goes, I think it is his price. I think the price is the problem with Rashford. At $9 million, there's so many options that are scoring between Odegaard, Saka, Martinelli, Madison, even the highs of Foden. And I think the fact that United really isn't clicking or doing anything at this point. I mean, if you really even look at last week's big haul by Fernandez, it was not really anything to write home about. It was a penalty, some bonus points, and it just really wasn't a great performance. The Matoma one surprises me because for me, he's been one of the brightest players in the Premier League through 3 matches. So he looks like he can always score. Brighton always looks like they're looking to score. And I think what really jumps out at me with them is that their fixtures are about to turn, but they haven't turned yet. So if you own the player, why wouldn't you hold them until right when the fixtures turn, especially at that low price? So, and when we talk about Gabriel, I have to admit, I'll tell you now, I'll jump the shark and jump a segment here. I sold Gabriel this week. And I was holding on because I felt eventually he was going to start starting. And once he did, he'd be everybody's soup du jour again, because he would be a clean sheet magnet, goal scoring opportunities. And I still think he will get back to being an every match starter for Arsenal in the Premier League. I really do. But I had to jump off him just from a financial standpoint in my team and what I was doing and what my next few weeks look like. But I can understand why 460,000 people got sick of watching his price just decrease after he was someone they were told all summer long was an absolute necessity in their side.
Yeah.
How do the people who prognosticate this game get things like Gabrielle so wrong?
We don't account for just real life. I mean, managers are going to make decisions that they think is best for their team, and we don't know beyond the locker room what is best for the team. I mean, we can only get a glimpse of so much. We can only hear so much. Our eyes are one thing that we get to see on the pitch, but there's so many more levels to this that we will never really get access to. So it's tough because you don't really know sometimes how to navigate why someone who seemed like such a brick wall in defense now all of a sudden makes no sense for the manager, even though it looks like their problems are coming from not having a brick wall in the defense. So there's just some questions in life don't have answers, and this is one of them.
The craziest part for me is he's made 3 1-point appearances from the bench. And I'd argue he's been their best defensive player from the moment he came on in all 3 matches that he appeared in.
Yeah.
It's
bizarre.
He had started 78 Premier League matches in a row, and they supposedly turned down a 60 million pound bid from Paris Saint-Germain for him this summer. And then sit him on the bench. And some people are like, oh, there must be a fallout. If there was a fallout, he wouldn't be playing them.
He'd be gone.
It all comes down to me to this whole idea that he wants to play. And I've always said, everyone who knows me or listens to me on these podcasts knows I am a critic of Arteta's overall man management ability and skill as a manager. I think he has all the tactics. I think mentally he doesn't have it to be a champion. And I think we saw it last year when he fell short. And I think we'll see it this year in the Champions League when he gets matched up against top-level managers. And I think he's just undressed. He believes he's Pep Guardiola, and you have to change everything every year. He made Ben White a really good right back, then decided to make him a mediocre center back. And at the same time, he weakened Saliba and Gabriel's overall value. It just makes no sense. But eventually, we'll bring back Zinchenko. But Bickler is right. You could take off that T and it would just be Chris. Or it could just be, hey, Gally, here we go on Arteta. And it's the truth. It's not only a bad decision, he ruins my fantasy weeks, which is all the reason I'm angry. But let's talk about defenses. This was a nice little graphic you sent over to me. So why don't you go ahead and break down what we're looking at here to give players an idea of where they should be looking at their overall defensive fantasy assets.
Yeah, so this is just a fun little graphic. As you can see, the top part there, goals conceded, that is just, it's as simple as that. Which teams have conceded the most goals? They have the bottom 3 of 7-6-5 conceded, the top 3 of 3-2-1. And then the next one is kind of one that a lot of people focus in on a little more sometimes. It's the expected goals amount conceded, because sometimes when you look at expected goals, it gives you a better overview of what big chances were and how often these defenses are giving up these big chances. And so in this case, maybe Brent Leno deserves a little bit of credit here for some games for not giving up more than he already should have, right? Because with Fulham up almost at 10 goals expected to concede, but only giving up half of that, it's a good sign for at least the goalkeeper being good, or maybe the teams they've played just haven't been able to finish well. So if you're looking to, if maybe you're for whatever reason free hitting or wild carding, or if you're making one transfer and you're looking to target week by week, finding those teams who have given up a lot of chances are usually a good way to go. And not surprisingly, we have Sheffield and Luton part of the 3 most given up big chances, because they are promoted sides, are going to be a little bit weaker. The one surprising team in there, Brighton, having the second most expected goals conceded, is a little interesting. I know that De Zerbi loves to play up and down so much, so maybe it's not so surprising because they're really open. But defensively, they seem to play so well that you wouldn't expect them to be there. So yeah, and then if on the flip side, if you're looking for clean sheet points, having players from Arsenal, if you get the right defender, Brentford, City, Like seeing how well those defenses are not allowing those big chances happening will also help you try and score more points for your defense.
Yeah, I think it's a great graphic, and it lets you know where the goals are shipping and where we see certain things coming in. I think it also really shows to you that there are a lot of teams in this league that are going to really struggle with stopping goals from scoring all year long, because it's consistent across the board as far as who the most expected against is, and it's consistent against the board about the goals conceded. It's Wolves, it is Fulham, it's Everton. Even the Brighton one's a little surprising on both the XG and the big chances, but I also think that comes down to the fact that they go forward so much without as deep of a side and as big of a defensive core. So I think really what you have to see is this graphic to me screams we ultimately should be absolutely attacking fixtures over the next 6 to 10 game weeks that are against both Luton and Sheffield. Like those two sides aren't actually ready to defend. Paul makes a good point about Brighton saying that's probably weighted heavily based by their last performance. And of course it is. When you only have 3 game weeks to actually look at. But that is a Brighton side that conceded 5 to an Everton side that looked like they couldn't score a goal to win a match and gave up 5 in Brighton. And I think that's the problem with Brighton is there's always a moment where they're ready to give out that one performance where they actually just lay an absolute egg. And it's not a knock on them. It's just their next step in the maturation as a club to kind of move forward is that they don't have those inconsistent moments. So if we look this week and start to prepare and start to talk about how we're looking at, here's a captaincy pick, projected points, including the opponent. Is there any question for you that Haaland isn't the captain for this week, even though he's come off 2 rough to subpar moments?
That just means that he's due, right? Gambler's fallacy. I mean, he's due for a big game if he hasn't had one in the last 2 weeks. Right now, there isn't anything to tell me that I shouldn't captain Haaland. The interesting thing that I'm thinking about post-international break is seeing how City plays this weekend and then maybe giving him another week or two. There could be a good argument to potentially not have Haaland in your team at all and maybe downgrade to an Alvarez and use that money elsewhere. So it's going to be, and of course, as soon as you do that, Haaland's going to go off for like 3 hat tricks in a row. But it's if they're not clicking on all cylinders, and it's weird to say because they've taken 9 points out of 9, but for some reason, it just doesn't feel like the same City. And so if they're not playing how we expect them to play, then maybe using that extra money elsewhere would be a good idea. The only player missing from this list, looking at it, that I think should be on there would be Jared Bowen. Just because they're playing Luton tomorrow, I would have expected him to maybe crack the top 10. So it's interesting not to see him on here, but and instead seeing Jota on there. But this is all just based on math and calculations and projections. So it is what it is.
David Cosgrove jumps in and says, I feel like I need to change from Haaland just to try something different. And I made the comment last week, like after the blank, and honestly, this week was a poor week. He scored the goal, missed the penalty. So it was a mediocre week. And, a 4 point is nothing to write home about when he's a permanent captain. And I do think you start to look at it and you think to yourself, if Pep's not there, if the tactics aren't right, he doesn't have De Bruyne. Like, he really just scores goals. Like, that's all he does. Like, he doesn't get many assists. He doesn't create. He doesn't get bonus points unless he scores goals because he doesn't have a lot of like creative passes. It makes a lot of sense, and the money, the value, like it's why Mo's not in my team right now. Mo's not in my team not because he's not great. Because if Mo doesn't score goals and get assists in a big way from a fantasy standpoint at that price, if you're not captaining him, it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. And I think as the season goes on, I wouldn't be shocked to find that this year's template actually finds a world where you don't have Mo and you don't have Holland, and you have everyone else. And if those guys are scoring, you just have to pick the right captain every week. And I think that's always come down. I've said to you for a long time, as long as we've been talking about this game and chatting about it even offline before we were doing the show, it's always about lineups, projected points, and picking the right captain. And then utilizing your big chips like the bench boost, your triple captain properly. I think when you do that, you're in a good spot. Paul jumps in with, you're playing matchups, moving it off of him, and even then, that's a gamble. Feels like the smaller gamble is stay with him, especially the way City plays the back half of the season. And I think Paul's absolutely right. Like, if you really just want to grind this thing out, you captain Holland like everybody else every single week, because the expected ownership is always at 135 to 140%. And part of that is because players have just stopped playing the game after match week 1. And Holland set as captain, he sits in their teams all year long, and he just brings scores up, right? But where I also think is that's the differential you really have. If you're willing to gamble on this game and not have Salah and not have Holland and have the best balanced team you could have and search out the best matchups each week and hope you get the big scores on the captain's picks, I think you could pick up a good 500,000 to $1 million overall in the standings by the end of the year, just purely by having the willingness to do it. You could also finish $6.5 million in the world and call it a wasted season. That's kind of the stretch to what you offer, right?
But at least you could say you had fun doing it. You know, there's an argument to make that if you're just doing it to play just like everyone else, it gets so boring and it gets so tedious and it doesn't feel like you're actually playing fantasy. It just feels like you're playing everyone else's game. You're not playing your own game. You're not playing for fun. You're not trying to enjoy it. And that's something that we've harped on, is make sure that you still have fun doing this, because if you're not doing this and it's not fun, and that's worthless, right? It's not, there's no point to do it. So if your strategy is to go and kind of attack it in a different way to make it more fun, whether you finish in the top 500K or you finish in the bottom 6 million, do it. You know, just have some fun with it. And I think that's part of it, like Kazi was saying, is just to try something different. Who knows? Do it. And it might work out. And everything's a gamble anyway. You know, Holland could get hurt in 3 weeks and you might have been the first one off of the train, and you were able to hold a 0.1 or 0.2 million extra because you went off of him early. Who knows? So it's more of a just play your own game for fun, and don't, if you want to be competitive, you're going to have to do what everyone else is doing because you need to stay within the range for now. But if you don't really care that much, then yeah, go off the beaten path and do something crazy and let us know what it is.
Absolutely, let us know what it is, because we need the help. When we look at this graphic here, we look at this week's expected value or expected points versus value by position. What on this screen, in your opinion, jumps out first? You were the one who shared this.
I mean, Sarr at Spurs is pretty high. At 4.5 million, having the expected points that high, just the same as his teammate Madison, seems a little crazy. But other than that, I feel like we're still pretty much in sort of traditional waters, so to speak, kind of exactly who we'd expect to score the most will score the most. It's based on fixtures, right? With Brentford playing Bournemouth at home, you have a couple Brentford defenders up high. Udogie after a great week. Disasi's playing well for Chelsea. Chilwell, of course, is getting up and down the field, so defenders make sense. So yeah, overall, I feel like there aren't. Last week we had a couple surprises. This week it seems pretty sane, I guess.
I still feel like the league is too top heavy trying to project points to defenders. I just feel like there aren't enough clean sheets happening for defenders to actually warrant this type of investment. I think on the goalkeeper side, it's basically pretty basic. We know what's going to happen there. Areola makes sense playing against Luton at such a low price that I'm surprised he's not higher. The 3.8 seems low to me, seeing the fact that Luton scored the goal in the first week of the season, and I'm not sure they're going to score again until Christmas. The defenders make sense. I'd like to more focus on the midfielders. Embuemo at second highest. Saka. Sar doesn't make sense to me. I understand he scored the goal. It must just offset because he didn't play in match week 1, so maybe it's averages. Martinelli and Madison make a lot of sense. So I think there's a lot there. Where I don't think you can pick apart this is on the striker side. If you're not playing Holland, other than Holland, I'm not really sure where you could actually put any money down on any of these strikers actually producing from a fantasy standpoint. Where do you kind of land on the striker side of things?
I think if the fact that Wissa's only at 6.2 and Brentford's at home against Bournemouth, I feel like that's a pretty nice fixture. And Wissa's has, as we've seen the last couple of weeks, he's been able to produce and give you some returns. So from the forward spot, I don't have much faith in Jackson. I feel like maybe the Chelsea Forest game will be wide open, and that benefits the guys like Jackson. But we've seen he's had moments where he's really struggled in front of net, just by himself, wide open net, not really knowing what to do. So I like the Wissa pick, don't like the Jackson pick, and then Holland's just Holland. So I think overall there's, like you said, there's a lot of players I feel like are doing a 1 forward setup. And if they're doing 2 forward setups, it's like Holland and Alvarez because they don't want to miss out on that City return. So if you do have the room for Wissa and you want to take a little bit of a differential shout, Wissa would be the guy to go to, I think, this week.
So we look at your team from last week. Talk us through what you did, how it went, what you wished happened different.
Well, there's nothing I could have done differently besides maybe start Turner over Pickford. But even then, I mean, it didn't make sense to do it then. And it is what it is. So I think as it looks, everything worked out. I put in Mbeumo for Richarlison, so that's kind of a wash. I think in the long run, it'll be more beneficial. But other than that, that was my one move. Kind of kept it simple. Dropped Gabriel to the bench. He's still on my team. I'm still sort of like in limbo with that guy. And then Botman against Liverpool for me didn't make sense. That's why Udogie, Estupinian, and Chilwell got the starts, which helped out. Obviously, points wise, maybe if Botman had been in for Estupinian, I would have got an extra point, but it didn't make sense at the time. So overall, everything went well. My players performed as well as I think they could have, and it is what it is. In a perfect world, Bruno would have been my captain, but I wasn't going to pick Bruno Fernandes over Holland in that situation.
And what are your plans for this week?
My plans for this week include no plans. I'm actually going to hold a transfer. And I say that, and I might end up with fucking Jared Bowen by 11 a.m. tomorrow. But I think my plan is to hold, and then after the international break, have the 2 free transfers, especially after the news. If any players get hurt, what have you, I'll have an extra spare transfer to take care of anything that might happen. So I feel really good about this team coming into this week. It's going to be unchanged. Like, this will be the exact same 3-5-2 setup. And I think maybe besides Pickford was staying because they're playing Sheffield. So this would be the exact same setup. Holland captain, and boring, but it's what makes most sense for me right now.
No, I don't disagree with it. I think it's actually the right decision to do. And I think holding a transfer actually makes a lot of sense with this side. You can compete with that team next week. And ultimately, all you have to really do is set yourself up to be able to compete in 2 weeks. And then, and you get the 2 weeks to see how things go. God forbid something bad happens and you lose a couple players to injury between next match week and the international breaks. You have your wild card if you wanted to do. If you're ever going to wild card, you might as well do it when you have 2 weeks to make unlimited transfers and actually move things around. So I actually like the maneuver by your part to do that at this point. So take a look at my side. It wasn't a terrible week. Obviously, like you, I could have had Turner in for Pickford, would have picked up a point. Never would do it knowing he was playing United and Pickford was against Wolves. And let's be real, they score a ridiculous goal late in the match. And if they don't score it, it all looks brilliant because Pickford probably gets 8 points. And we each pick up 6 more between the clean sheet and the bonus. So the killer for me was probably the goal against City, just because it dropped Guardiola's clean sheet off for me. That really hurt me. Also, obviously, you know, Brighton getting drummed didn't help with his Stupion. And Foden once again getting benched, doesn't even matter. Pep's not there. It's still Pep roulette. But when I look at this team, I know I have a lot of things. I will say I made a move immediately. I basically, about minutes after the last match, I dropped Gabriel finally. I waited. I went down to Gusto. I did it before the price increase. So I basically picked up Gusto's price increase and didn't lose the 0.2 this week that Gabriel has lost in price. So overall, from a price standpoint, it worked out for me. I don't like what I did. I won't lie. I picked up a player I'm not sure will start this week, which is never a move I like to do, but I felt like because I don't want a wild card this early, I felt it was important to move Gabriel on. I really don't also like that I have 2 Sheffield United players as 2 playing members on my bench, except for they're playing Everton this week. So I'm actually thinking about starting both of them. Because I feel one might get a clean sheet and the other might score a hat trick. Neither might score again all season long, but this week against Everton, it might make a lot of sense. I think my biggest thing with this team is 2 weeks in a row, I've made small green arrow moves up, which makes me think like I've still built something that's pretty solid with like a base to it. And I think with a few moves without taking hits, I can make a move pretty quick. I just have to start getting right when I captain other people or how I'm allocating some of the middle tier funds. And by middle tier, I basically mean how much money I'm spending on my midfield. I need to make sure they're starting to bring in actual value. But this team also has about 3.5 million in the bank. And I think it went up to 4 after I made the move from Gabriel to Gusto. So my goal is to actually take a week off from transfers, get into the international break and go and have a double transfer where I might make 3 with 4 million in the bank. And I can almost have like a wild card by taking a -4 and move around 3-4 players.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. I don't love what's happened with my team. I have to be honest. I kind of hate how the season's gone so far. I hate how I've dealt with my team. I think that the midweek transfers I've made have been poor. But I'm still in the top 25% of the overall game with 9 million people in the top 2 million. So I think the goal is to be there at the end of the season. And if you get too caught up where you are in match week 3, you do things like hit the wild card button before you really know what's happening or where the Champions League draw is or what's happening in Europe. It just seems really illogical to me. So As we start to wrap this thing up, what are your couple points you want to point out to the listeners, and what is your big plan for the next 3 to 4 weeks throughout the international break regarding your fantasy team and how you're going to look at things?
Yeah, to bounce off what you're saying, it's a slow grind, right? If you're trying to make up a lot of room right now, you're only going to distance that gap further down the road. I think maybe having a very average start psychologically feels better, because if you have just decent weeks every week and you just have those slight little increases, those slight little green arrows, that still feels good. If you start off really hot and then all of a sudden you just start to see red arrow after red arrow after red arrow because you started so well and you kind of just now starting to fall behind the pack, like psychologically it hurts a little bit. So I think just understanding that it's a very long game and we haven't seen any of it yet is important to remember. As far as my team, for me, I'm just going to take a week off mentally off of all fantasy Premier League, just because you're going to need those. We're not going to get many breaks as the season starts to really get swinging in. And so kind of taking a nice couple of days of a breather to sit back, enjoy some international football, if that's what you want to do. Just particularly nothing exciting for me in my life to watch international football, especially when Matty Cash is the best player on your team. There's no hope for anything. So yeah, just gonna try and just sit back a little bit, enjoy life for a little, and then just go head first when the PL comes back.
Paul Bickler says taking a mental health break come a long way since we talked about doing this for totally true, actually, to be totally honest. But I have to say, we're going to look at this, and I agree with you. And while we're on that, why don't we just make the announcement now, with the fact that there will be no Premier League matches the following weekend? We will take next week off as a mental health break for all of you American Scouts or Fantasy EPL Show supporters. We're going to take next week off because really we would just come on here and review players. We would talk about how poorly the last week went. We'll do that the week after, and we'll review where we are and getting ready. I'll say this. For me, what we need more than anything is to just take a calm, deep breath about where our teams are, look at them on the big picture, plan out where you want them to be by November, December, because then you have another wild card that you can utilize come January and past. So you can wild card between now and then, get your team ready, attack the last 6 weeks of the year. Because I really do believe like a big part of fantasy football is between like Thanksgiving and New Year's Day, because it's when the fixtures become hot and heavy. You get League Cup matches mixed in. If you're in Europe, you still play some more matches in December. And those matches are almost as heighted, if not larger. So the league becomes something else, and all we care about for this program are the points scored by players playing in the league. And I think for that, you're best off to really look at your team from about October to January 1st and really think to yourself, like, what do I need to do here to maximize the points I can obtain? And I do think this is going to be a season where the players who alter their captain's picks can really find joy. And I know there's a fear, like I can't not captain Holland because if he gets 14, I'm screwed. 28 compared to 14 is a beast. But if he gets one and all those 45,000 to 80,000 people or 85% people that captain him get two, and you have a player who gets 13, that 26 to 2 run is what's going to get you in the top 10,000.
Yep.
5,000, 2,000, whatever you want to be. So put yourself out there, make some big moves. I think the more people that make big moves will lead to less of the actual blanket template. and make it be a little bit more of a balanced template where we know the players everyone has, but the decisions made around those players between who starts, who's captain, when we triple captain, how we bench boost, that will ultimately dictate who finishes first, second, fifth, or 20,000ths in this game. And I think that's a really big point. And I don't know that people understand enough about how the scoring works to actually know how to combat it. So with that, we will get ready to wrap this thing up. Any other parting shots tonight?
Oh, let's just have a fun weekend. Let's hope that all of our players' haul, as you like to say, our haul into captain choice works out, because this week I don't think there's another choice, especially with Paulinho most likely leaving Fulham. No idea how Fulham will defend any sort of City attack, so I could expect that ending 6-7-1 maybe, and Holland will be responsible for 4 of those. So let's just have a good weekend, and and enjoy the break, and then we'll be back and happy and ready to go.
Absolutely. Appreciate it as always. I am with you on that. May your transfers make big moves. May your moves become hauls. May some of those players that you moved off all blank, as long as they are not players in my side, because I need points, because the scoring is not going in my direction. We will see who is back on top 2 weeks from now when we get back on this show. Who is back on top? Who made the bigger move this week? Who won those head-to-head matchups? So, for all of us here at American Scouser TV, thank you very much for listening. As always, please give us a like. If you aren't already, follow us and subscribe on YouTube. Share this podcast or other content that we share with others. Get back to us with your comments. Let us know how we can improve the programming. And as always, for myself and the Polish Prince from Chicago, we appreciate you watching, and we will see you all on our next show, which will be 2 Thursdays from now at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central. Thank you, and have a great week.
Smash that like